There's a message that's been waiting for you. Not written on paper, not addressed with your name, but meant for you all the same. And Carl Jung spent the last decades of his life trying to make sure it would reach whoever needed it, whenever they were ready to hear it. If you found your way here, in the particular state you're in right now, there's a reason. The message doesn't arrive when you're comfortable. It arrives when something in you has started to crack open just enough to let it through. Jung understood something most people never grasp about their own lives. He believed that beneath the person you present to the world, beneath the roles you play and the name you answer to, there's a second presence. A deeper intelligence that's been watching your entire life, sending you signals, trying to get your attention. He called it the self. And the message it's been sending you, the one you've maybe been feeling for years without being able to name it, is the same message Jung dedicated his life to translating. So today I want to deliver that message as clearly as I can. What Jung actually discovered about the voice you've been ignoring, why it grows louder the longer you resist it, and what it's been trying to tell you this entire time. Because if there's a restlessness in you that won't go quiet, a sense that you were meant for something you haven't touched yet, Jung would tell you that's not a malfunction. That's the message arriving. Let me start with what Jung noticed in the people who came to him. Almost none of them arrived because they were falling apart in obvious ways. Many of them were successful, respected. They had the marriage, the career, the reputation. On paper, their lives worked, and yet they came to him hollowed out, describing a feeling they couldn't explain to anyone else without sounding ungrateful. A quiet, persistent sense that they were living a life that didn't belong to them. Jung recognized this immediately because he'd lived it himself. He'd built a brilliant career, aligned himself with the most famous psychologist of his era, secured his place in history. And then somewhere around midlife, the whole structure started to feel like a costume. He described a period where he genuinely feared for his own mind, where the ground he'd built his identity on turned to water beneath him. What saved him wasn't going back to who he'd been. It was listening, finally, to the part of himself he'd spent his whole life talking over. That's the first piece of the message. The discomfort you feel isn't evidence that something's gone wrong with your life. It's evidence that your life has gotten too small for who you actually are. Think about how this works. When you're a child, you learn very quickly which parts of yourself are welcome and which parts need to disappear. Maybe your curiosity was too much for the adults around you, so you learned to stop asking. Maybe your sensitivity made someone uncomfortable, so you built a harder shell. Maybe your ambition threatened someone, so you learned to shrink. Piece by piece, you assembled a version of yourself that could survive the specific world you were born into. Jung called this constructed version the persona. And here's the trap. The persona works. It gets you accepted. It earns you love and approval and safety. It's so effective that most people spend their entire lives believing the persona is who they are. They never suspect that underneath it, all the exiled parts are still alive, still waiting, still pressing against the walls of the container you built to keep them contained. The message Jung wanted you to receive is that those exiled parts don't die. They wait, and they have a way of making themselves known. You feel them in the middle of the night, when the distractions fall away and something in your chest aches for a life you can't quite picture. You feel them when you watch someone else living boldly, and something in you flares with an envy that's really just recognition. That could have been me. That could still be me. You feel them in the sudden, inexplicable sadness that hits you at moments when you're supposed to be happy, at the party, at the celebration, at the milestone you worked so hard to reach. That sadness isn't ingratitude. It's a part of you standing at the window of the life you built, looking in, wondering when it will finally be let inside. Jung believed these signals were the self trying to correct your course. The psyche, in his understanding, has a built-in drive toward wholeness, the same way a plant bends toward light without being told to. He called this drive individuation. It's the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were shaped to be. And the message it keeps sending, in 1,000 different forms, is always some version of the same 3 words: come back home. But here's what makes this so difficult, and it's the part Jung was unflinchingly honest about. Coming home to yourself means passing through the very things you've spent your whole life avoiding. The parts of you that got exiled didn't get exiled because they were worthless. They got exiled because they were inconvenient or threatening or too much for the people around you. Your anger, your desire, your refusal to go along, your hunger for something more than what you were handed. Jung gathered all of these rejected pieces under a single term, the shadow. And he made a claim that unsettled everyone who heard it. He said the shadow isn't your dark side in the sinister sense. It's your disowned life. It holds not just what's ugly in you, but much of what's most vital, most alive, most genuinely yours. That's why the message is so hard to answer. To retrieve the parts of yourself you buried, you have to go back to where you buried them. And that means feeling the fear that made you bury them in the first place. Imagine someone who learned as a child that having needs made them a burden. So they became endlessly accommodating, the person who never asks for anything, who's proud of how little they require. That self-image feels like virtue. It feels like character. But underneath it, an entire dimension of the person is starving. The part that wants, that reaches, that says this is what I need without apology. Jung would say the message reaching that person isn't asking them to become selfish. It's asking them to become whole, to let the starving part come back to the table. And I want to speak directly to you for a moment, because if you've been feeling that pull, that sense that some essential part of you has been left outside in the cold for a very long time, then the message has already reached you. You wouldn't feel the ache if there were nothing left to answer it. The people who are truly lost don't feel restless. They feel nothing. The restlessness you carry is the surest sign that the deeper self is still alive in you, still reaching, still refusing to let you settle for a half-lived life. If that restlessness is what brought you here, and you want a way to actually listen to it instead of drowning it out with noise, we put together something for exactly this. It's called True Self-Discovery. 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's approach, built to help you make contact with the parts of yourself that have been waiting to be heard. It's not a quick fix, and it doesn't pretend to be. It's a way of finally turning toward the message instead of away from it. The link is below whenever you're ready, because turning toward the message is where everything changes. And Jung was clear that this turn isn't gentle. When you finally stop running from yourself, the first thing you encounter usually isn't peace. It's everything you've been outrunning, all the feelings you've been managing, all the truths you've been avoiding, all the versions of your life you decided not to live. They come up to meet you. Jung described this as a kind of reckoning, a period where the neat story you told yourself about who you are starts to fall apart. And it's disorienting, because for a while, you're no longer the old self and not yet the new one. You're in between. Most people, when they hit this in-between place, do everything they can to escape it. They fill the silence. They double down on the old life. They convince themselves the restlessness was just a phase, a midlife thing, a mood. And Jung watched, again and again, as people stood at the threshold of becoming who they truly were, and turned back. Not because they were weak, because no one ever told them that the disorientation was the doorway, and that the discomfort they were feeling was exactly what transformation is supposed to feel like from the inside. This is the heart of the message. The confusion isn't a sign you've lost your way. It's a sign you finally left the path that was never yours to begin with. Jung had a word for what becomes possible when you can stay in that in-between space long enough. He called it the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to hold two opposing poles at once, the old self and the emerging self, without collapsing into either, until something new forms that couldn't have existed before. It's like the moment between breathing out and breathing in, that small still point where nothing is happening and everything is being prepared. You can't rush it, you can only trust it. And what emerges from it is not a better version of the persona. It's something more solid than the persona ever was. Jung noticed that people who came through this process developed a kind of inner center of gravity. Their sense of who they were no longer depended on being approved of, or admired, or needed. They'd met the parts of themselves they used to fear, and instead of destroying them, those parts made them more complete, more real, harder to knock over. Picture someone who spent 40 years being who everyone else expected them to be, the good child, the reliable partner, the dependable one. And then something broke open, and they went through that terrible, luminous passage of reclaiming themselves. On the other side, they don't become a stranger. They become, for the first time, fully themselves. They say what they mean. They want what they want. They stop performing a life and start living one. And the people around them feel it. Some are drawn to it, and some are threatened by it. Because a person who stopped seeking approval can't be controlled by withholding it. That's the cost Jung was honest about. Becoming whole makes you less manageable. The relationships and roles built around your smallness will strain when you stop being small. Some won't survive it, but the ones that do become real in a way they never could have been before, because they're finally built on who you actually are, instead of the mask you were wearing to keep them comfortable. And here's something in the message that I don't want you to miss, because it's the part that offers the most hope. Jung didn't believe this transformation was reserved for the young. In fact, he believed the deepest individuation tends to happen in the second half of life. And he didn't mean that in strictly chronological terms. He meant that there comes a season, whenever it arrives for you, when the tasks of building an outer life give way to the task of finally meeting yourself. The years you spent constructing the persona weren't wasted. They were necessary. You needed a self strong enough to survive before you could afford to take it apart and find what's underneath. So, if part of you fears it's too late, that the unlived life is gone, the window closed, the chance missed, Jung would push back hard against that. The message doesn't come with an expiration date. It comes when you're ready, and readiness has nothing to do with age. Some people receive it at 30, some at 70. The only requirement is the willingness to stop running. What would it actually mean to stop running? Jung wouldn't hand you a formula, because the whole point is that no one else can tell you who you are. But he pointed toward how to listen. Pay attention to your dreams, which he saw as messages from the deeper self in a language older than words. Pay attention to what moves you, the things that make you weep or burn with longing, because those reactions are the self showing you where the living energy is buried. Pay attention to the moments you feel most like yourself, and the moments you feel most like a performance, and let the difference teach you which direction you're supposed to be walking. And pay attention to the discomfort, not to eliminate it, but to follow it. Because in Jung's understanding, the thing you're most afraid to look at is almost always guarding the thing you most need to find. The fear is a signpost. It marks the exact location of the treasure. This is why the message so often arrives disguised as a crisis. The failed relationship, the career that suddenly feels unbearable, the depression that no achievement can lift, the anxiety that won't explain itself. From inside, these feel like disasters, but Jung learned to see them as the psyche's way of forcing a conversation you've been refusing to have. The self will use whatever it must to get your attention, and when the quiet signals go ignored for long enough, it stops whispering and starts shaking the walls. If your walls are shaking right now, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not being punished, you're being called. The upheaval in your life may be the most honest thing that's happened to you in years. The moment the deeper self finally broke through the surface it's been pressing against for so long. It doesn't feel like a gift while you're inside it. Almost nothing that transforms us does. But the people who look back on these seasons rarely describe them as the times their lives fell apart. They describe them as the times their real lives began. That's the message, stripped down to its core. You are not who you were told to be. There's a fuller version of you that's been waiting your entire life for permission to exist, and that permission was never going to come from anyone else. It has to come from you. It comes the moment you stop asking whether the world approves of who you are and start asking who you actually are underneath everything the world taught you to become. Jung staked his whole life's work on the belief that this question is worth answering, even though answering it costs you the comfort of the familiar. He believed the unlived life doesn't just quietly disappear if you ignore it. It turns into symptoms. It leaks out as the vague depression, the inexplicable anger, the sense of watching your own life from behind glass. The parts of you that don't get lived don't go away. They go underground, and from there they shape everything, usually for the worse. The only way to reclaim them is to bring them into the light and let them live. So the choice the message puts in front of you is really this. You can keep the version of yourself you've been performing, the one that's safe and approved and slowly suffocating. Or you can undertake the one adventure Jung believed every human being is actually here for, the journey of becoming, fully and without apology, the person you already are underneath everything you've been hiding. He never promised that journey would be easy. He promised it would be real. And he believed, with everything he understood about the human soul, that a real life, even a difficult one, is worth infinitely more than a comfortable performance of someone else's expectations. The message has reached you now. What you do with it is the one thing no teaching, no guide, no message from anyone can decide for you. That part has always been yours, and it always will be. But you're not standing at this threshold by accident. Something in you brought you here. Something in you is ready, even if the rest of you is still afraid. And that readiness, Jung would tell you, is the deeper self finally stepping forward to meet you. The one that's been sending signals your whole life. The one that never gave up on you, even in the years you couldn't hear it. It's here now, waiting on the other side of your fear, holding the life you were actually meant to live. All it's asking is that you turn toward it and take the first step home. If you're ready to take that step, and you want something to walk beside you while you do, that's exactly what true self-discovery was made for. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, built to help you finally answer the message instead of just feeling it. A way to sit with the questions that matter and start hearing what your own depths have been trying to tell you all along. You'll find it linked below.